good morning, children. You may exit. What a privilege it is to prepare the way of the Lord. I'm gonna, Faith and a friend, could you pass out the sermon snacks this morning, please? Faith and friends. Oh, she found a friend. What a privilege it is to prepare the way of the Lord. I'm going to share for a little bit on the message that I believe that's in the heart of God for today. And then towards the end, I'm going to have Faith join me up here. And we're just going to share some stories from England and what the Lord did. I know a lot of you have been asking and kind of wanting to know, and I feel like it ties in really well with what I want to talk about today. So we're going to share that and just kind of what the Lord did there, maybe in us and through you as well as you partnered with us. David did everything. Say that with me. David did everything. David was a shepherd boy. David was a giant slayer. He was the best friend ever, Jonathan. He was a worshiper by design. David was a demon fleer. He was a poet and a prophet. He was a king of a nation. David was a fearless leader. David is famously known as being a man after God's own heart. David did everything. Are you one of those people who does everything? It's like those type A personalities. You just do everything all the time. Like you can't sit down. You sit down for a moment and you're just like, I should be doing something. There's always something to do. That was David. He did everything. In Acts 13:36, it says, for David, after he had served God's will and purpose in his own generation, fell asleep. David fulfilled every purpose and will of God for him in his generation, and then he fell asleep. David was a big deal. David's life is literally said to be rooted in Jesus Christ himself. And it's wild to think and to mention that the Bible actually says that Jesus Christ will sit eternally upon the throne of David. David was a big deal. When we get to 1 Chronicles 13, it's at a point in David's life where he's roughly about 37 years old, and by now he has been anointed as the future king of Israel for over 20 years, and he's been doing stuff. He's been doing stuff his whole life, really. He was chilling in the back country. He was watching sheep. He was defeating Goliath with a stone. He learned an instrument, and he played it to help King Saul and his demons. He, for about 10 years, he lived his life on the run. He was looked upon as a rebel by his own nation because they didn't understand him, they didn't get him, they didn't understand his calling. But now things have changed, and it's later, and the nation is now unified under David's leadership as king. And then he's holding this meeting with all his leaders. And the thing that God had spoken out over David's life through the prophet Samuel many years ago about his anointing and his calling, now the entire nation was finally behind it after all these years. So hear this. Sometimes it takes a while for the people of God to catch up to the things of God. So David takes the stage, and then he starts his speech. And it's his moment. He's waited for this moment. It's a big moment. There's people, they're listening for once. Here they are, the first time. And in this moment, the first thing he says, if it seems good to you, and if it is from the Lord, let's go. This could have been the original, let's go. Our job is to do the first things first. And always the first thing has to be what is from the Lord. Now, what we need to understand is this. Often, what you do first when following the calling of God is not expected. There was a lot going on in the nation, but David first, as was in the heart of God, says, let's go get the ark and bring it back. They had Philistine problems, they had economy issues, they had civil war threats. But let's go get the ark. We also need to remind ourselves that God could have chosen anyone for this time and season. However, just anyone would not have chosen for their first thing on the job to go get the ark, the symbol of worship, and return it to the city. So why is David king at this time in this season after so many years of being anointed and waiting and doing all the things in the backcountry? Because God knew that this person, the person David had been his whole life, during the pasture time, during the Goliath time, during the running time, all of that, he would continue to be as God's now leader. He would stay consistent with the reputation of following God without reservation. I have to imagine it wasn't easy doing all the things before the main thing. Have you ever been in a pasture? I hadn't until I was in England. And Faith and I were on a walk, and we saw a sheep pasture. And we really wanted to go in to see the sheep, but there was wires around. And I was like, do you think we could go in? And we're like, not sure. We didn't want to get like arrested or anything. So I wasn't sure. So then we didn't go in that day. And then I asked someone later. I said, there's pastures and there's sheep, and we wanted to go in to see the sheep. Is that allowed? And they said, no, that's not allowed. It's illegal unless there is a permissive footpath. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, whatever that means. So the next day we were on a walk, and we see the sheep again, and we really want to go in to see that. They're so cute, all these sheep. And we just wanted to go in and get closer, and then we're like, oh, we can't go in. And then we get a little closer to this. It was another sheep pasture, not a different one than before. And there's this little tiny sign, and it says, permissive footpath. We're like, well, now we can go. So we went in the gate, and we saw the sheep. And the main reason we went in is because one of the sheep had gotten out of the gate and was on the outside of the gate and couldn't get back in. So Faith was going to go and try and save the sheep and get the, like the story of the 99 and the one who left. Yeah, it was like very, very biblical. And so she was going to go and kind of get the one back. But every time she tried to approach it, it would run away. It was like afraid. So anyway, I say all that to say this. I'd imagine, being a shepherd and herding sheep and all that and keeping them safe was not an easy life for David. Yet he was consistent and faithful in the backcountry. Our history is our resume. When we're called of God to do something, sometimes it's not always an easy yes. And sometimes we feel like someone else could do it better. And I even remember back when we were having conversations about first going to England, and Faith's like, I don't even know if she remembers this, but she was like, I don't even know why it would be me. Like, why is the Lord asking me to do this? Because I don't necessarily know what I'm doing or have anything that other people don't have, or maybe other people could do it better or whatever. And I remember saying this to her. I said, God asked you because you would say yes. Because your reputation with the Lord is not unnoticed. Your reputation with the Lord is not unnoticed. But we unknowingly close future doors by the past doors we've said no to. So hear this. Our history is our resume. The secret time spent with Jesus and your answer to his past call is your credential and your credibility to what you will do with your current and future call. David's resume was this: the time in the field after being anointed, He was faithful. David's resume was this. He killed a giant when everyone else was afraid and wouldn't trust God that he would come through. David's resume was this. The time on the run, he was chased down by King Saul, going to kill him, yet he stayed honorable and humble. And God is looking for leaders who have developed a resume and a history with him and will put him absolutely first, like David did everything. And then there's Josiah, King Josiah in the Bible. Josiah did everything. Josiah was 8 years old and was pronounced king. He, however, did have an evil dad. So it was not an easy life for him. But he was a God pleaser. He followed David's example as an ancestor. Josiah was a straight shooter. He was a covenant restorer. He was a strong communicator, and he was wildly fearless in his leadership. This Josiah was like a child prodigy, clearly, and destined for greatness, marked from the beginning. And he grew strong in the Lord. How many know that age is irrelevant in the kingdom of God? Josiah followed the example of his great Uncle David. He had someone he could look to and follow. He was just a boy, but now he's king at 8 years old. He knows nothing. He's not even educated in the law of the covenant of God because he had an evil dad. The nation had been in ruins, and now he's king. My mind cannot even understand this. Can you comprehend an 8-year-old being like, now you're king? I mean, things are rough when you're like, maybe this kid can do better than what we have right now, The nation has raised up every evil device, shrine, idol, god. There's corruption everywhere. Meanwhile, there's this 8-year-old boy growing up, now it's a few years later, who has a few thoughts of what we should do next. But yet he had David to look to. How many of you know that when we don't know what to do, we can look to those who've gone before us and follow their lead? We are responsible for what we know, but we can have access to what has gone before us, because before we know, we don't know. But when you now know, you're responsible for what you now know. Now that I know, I'm responsible. How about everyone say that? Now that I know, I'm responsible. Josiah sent some officials with money that had been collected to the temple of God, and in order so that they could hire workers to restore the temple. So they went, and when they were in there doing their work, they found the book of the law. The high priest handed it to the secretary, and the secretary read it. Then, as they're reading it, they're like, we need to take this to King Josiah and read it to him. So they run and they take it to King Josiah, they read it to him, the book of the law of the covenant of God. Josiah was a hot mess. I mean, he was just like, he couldn't believe it. The words of God took a hold of him. He never heard this before. And once Josiah knew what was in the book for the first time, he was gripped with a responsibility to undo the evil and do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Now that I know, I'm responsible. Hear this. What's been done in the past, we can no longer do. What's been overlooked can no longer be overlooked. Michael Miller, in a book, His House's Presence, I believe it's called, says this. He said, throughout the Old Testament, we see the house of the Lord was central to the success or failure of a nation. There are 7 recorded revivals in the Old Testament, and all of them were a result of the leader who reestablished God's temple and pursued the ark as their primary mandate. If a leader tended to the presence of the Lord, the nation flourished. If it was disregarded, the nation suffered and often was destroyed. A leader who was not establishing God's dwelling on the earth and honoring his name was a leader who would become wayward and serve other gods. There was no middle ground. It was one or the other. And I feel like today is no different. We cannot have other gods. We cannot worship idols. A god or an idol is anything in our lives that we have to answer to before saying yes to God. This could be fear. This could be your comfort. This could be your money or your friends, a spouse. It could be a parent. It could be even things like exercise or food or your job, things like that. Anything you have to answer to before saying yes to what God's asking you to do. A god or an idol is also anything in our lives that we must attain in order to feel validated by others or feel loved by God. So it could be like a checklist of good things. Well, if I did all these things now, I feel validated or loved by God and people. Or spiritual disciplines, like if I read my Bible, if I pray, and then I feel better about myself. But that's placing an idol before the relationship. Right. It's accomplishments, things like that. A god or an idol is also, it could be a mask that we put on to portray what we want to be instead of who we are. Wow. So we might put something on social media to portray a certain way, but it's not truly who we are. It's the version of ourselves that we like the most, but it's not really us. It's not who we were created to be. It's not who we truly are. Or I put on a good face at church, but at home I'm different. But I have to keep my mask on in order to keep my image up. So those are like idols. Anyway, Josiah here in the story, he's moved to action. He's like, let's go. He didn't say, it's over, I'm doomed, the nation, I can't do this, it's crazy. Now I realize, now that I know I'm responsible for all this stuff, and I don't even know, I'm still like only a young adult at this time. But he was determined to correct what was wrong. In verse 2, it says he did what was right. In chapter 23, he calls everyone together, leaders and people, priests and prophets, and he reads the law, now of the book, the covenant, and to the people, and he renews himself to follow the Lord and his commands. And with all his heart, with all his soul, he pledges, and him and the people pledge to this. See, it takes one fearless lover of God to say, I'm done with the way things were and the way things are, and I'm re-upping my covenant to the Lord. Now, who's with me? Let's go. Let's do this. And then he starts removing the junk. He starts getting rid of the idols. He starts tearing down things that his forefathers had allowed to build up and were worshiping. And we need to do that. We need to remove the junk. If you guys remember back when in the spring, when a team from Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry came down, and they went upstairs in one of our major, huge rooms, and the room was filled with junk. If you hadn't seen it, well, your eyes are blessed to have not seen it, because the rest of us could never unsee it. So it was filled with junk, and this team came, and they eliminated all the junk. They took it all out. There's like 20 of them or whatever, 25 of them. They took it all out, and it was incredible. And, you'd think that they would complain because it was kind of like a hard job, and like some things were heavy, and it's up and downstairs, and it was hot. No. They were like, we're doing a prophetic act. And they would just like take this stuff and we're like, we're removing the junk. And they just took it like a spiritual significance to a natural situation. And I felt like they were so on that. Removing the junk from our church, removing the junk from our lives, removing the junk that we've allowed to accumulate and come in between us and the Lord. We must take down the idols. We must take down the junk. We cannot afford to live a life for the Lord in the presence of idols. Because we can, and we do. However, every false idol falls in the presence and the glory of God. It cannot stand. So how do we take down the idols? We create a resting place for the presence and the glory of God. In 2 Kings 23:21, King Josiah, this is when he says, this issue to all the people, you must celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God as required in the book of the covenant. There had not been a Passover celebration since the time when the judges ruled in Israel. But in the 18th year of King Josiah's reign, this Passover was celebrated. Josiah got rid of the mediums, the psychics, the household gods, the idols, and every detestable practice. He did this in obedience to the law written in the scroll. Never before had there been a king like Josiah who turned to the Lord with all his heart and soul and strength. And never had been a king since. He was iconic. Josiah did everything. Jesus is always the main point. Jesus did everything. He had 30-something years on the earth, 3 years of full-time ministry. Jesus lived a hobo life, honestly. He just kind of like traveled around from place to place. He didn't really have a home. He just traveled with his tribe. He challenged social norms. He was the Sunday rules breaker. He spoke offensive things to the religious crowd. He was a healer. He was a deliverer. He was a lover of people. He was absolutely fearless in his leadership. Jesus served the purpose of God in his time and generation. Jesus said, "My food is to do the will of the one who sent me and to completely finish his work." Jesus said, "Let's go to the rest of the villages so I can preach there also, because this is why I came." And he went to their meeting places through Galilee, preaching and throwing out demons. John 10:18, he said he purposed to lay down his life. Let's go. John 12:27, "Not my will, but yours." This was Jesus' mantra. This is what he did. This was who he was. Everything in the heart of God for Jesus to do, he did. He was fearlessly driven. He was wildly overtaken by the will of the Father. Jesus left all of heaven to bring heaven here. He was the walking, talking billboard of on earth as it is in heaven. He literally was that. He brought the very presence of God, because he was the presence of God. He brought continual worship, because everywhere he was, there was worship, because he was worship. He is God. He was the beauty of God, the essence of God. Jesus embraced his humanity in order to rectify every wrong, to break every demonic spirit, to take down idols of religion and rituals by walking the earth in the presence of himself. Jesus did everything. So you have King David, you have King Josiah, and you have King Jesus, 3 kings, setting in order the rule and reign of the one true God. Jesus, king before anyone ever was, and his reign is forever, sits on the throne of King David. David, the man after God's own heart, the ancestor and role model of King Josiah, the greatest idol killer ever recorded. David and Josiah needed in their generation to bring back worship and to destroy the evil that had been in place in order to prepare the way for Jesus to come. Jesus came and opened the way for humanity to encounter God in a way we had not previously been able to. So now we can take on the authority and the power of Jesus himself that caused demons to tremble and atmospheres to shift. We are now next in line in this kingship to take up the charge of David and Josiah, restore worship, destroy idols, prepare the way of the Lord. Like Jesus, we now offer our lives as an offering. Yeah. We are, the Bible says, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, to showcase his marvelous works. Our priesthood and our kingship is the great need in our generation. And we must live out who we are and who we are called to be. We must be the ones that God knows when he asked of something, we've already said yes. So what does our resume look like? What does our history that we've made with the Lord, what is that? What does it look like? What we do in our time and our generation makes a difference. I mean, our life is but a vapor, but I promise you it makes a difference. It makes a difference. You are needed in your time and your generation. You are. Every one of you. And all of us together, we have to do it together. And we all have different parts and we all have different ways that we contribute. It's not all going to be the same. I promise you, it will not. But it's all equally of value and importance. But we have such a small window of time. So the question is, are we doing all that's in the heart of God for our time? David did everything, decided everything. Jesus did everything. Will that be said of me? Will it be said of you that we did everything? That we did everything. Now I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit. Like I mentioned, I'm going to have Faith join me. We're going to sit. Because I want to share a little bit about how we went away to England and kind of what that looked like for us in what we felt and even some of your roles in it. We're not going to get to every story. It's impossible. Unless you guys have nothing to do today. I'm just kidding. Faith has to pack. She has to leave in a couple days. So to start, I want to start with this. Faith, can you tell kind of the story of how you first heard the call to go to the UK?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was on. Kind of says.
You are on.
Well, I was at a Sunday service. It was at like an evening service at school, and I was just in the back. It was like an all worship service. They do it like once a month. They call them encounter nights, and I just like sat down on the ground. There was no seats because those nights are pretty packed, and we came late. And I just kind of heard God say to go to the UK this summer for like ministry. And I was like, oh, okay. And I felt like I heard July, because I was like, okay, when? Like, I don't know when I'm supposed to do this. And I felt like I heard July. And at the time, that didn't make any sense to me, because we were planning to go to Mexico. So I was like, well, it can't be July, so I must have heard wrong, maybe August. And I didn't hear wrong, but it was in July.
So then how, that was back in the fall, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was back. So how did it then unfold? Because you didn't say anything, and like, did you think kind of it would happen, or like?
I didn't really get to a point where I was like, oh, this might not happen until like I came home for summer, but I was just kind of thought it was gonna happen, and I didn't tell really anyone because I just wasn't sure. It was like, what if I'm wrong? And I don't know. I don't want to tell everyone I'm doing something, and then all of a sudden I just like don't, and I'm like, oh, I don't even feel like I have a good enough reason to say why, so I just didn't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, how many can relate to that? You know, you feel something, you hear something, and you're like not quite sure. And, you know, you don't want to put it all out there because you're like, well, what if I'm wrong? And then, like, it's embarrassing, right? And so that's kind of, so fast forward, you know, Faith comes home for the summer for school, and we kind of shared a little bit of that story of how she ended up, like, asking me to come with her. And because it was, like, at the point where it's kind of like, you know, you need to book your flight or you're not going, because it was, like, that late, you know? And then we ended up going. So you need to know, as we'll share a couple stories of what happened. This was really hard. It was hard. It was a hard trip. We were not comfortable, hyped, or feeling settled at all. We were uncomfortable, scared, and pretty much nervous the whole time we were there. You know, it was definitely not one of those like, yeah, we were just like partying up in England. It was like every day it was like, can we do this? And we would like encourage each other, you know, like, okay, we're just gonna face it and do it. So it was hard. So why don't you actually share a little bit of how it was uncomfortable, specifically we started in Manchester at a youth conference.
That was really hard. I've never done anything like that before. Like, I've helped out with our own youth here, and I love them, and I know them, and I didn't know any of them, and I don't feel, I feel like it takes just a second for me to get comfortable with someone and learn more about them and all that stuff. And I didn't have a second. I had 4 days, and I was put in a group with, I think they're anywhere from their sophomore year in high school to senior year, I'm pretty sure. And they were also all very introverted, and I was so uncomfortable, and it felt really awkward all the time. But I mean, we ended up walking out of there with a few cool stories, so that was good.
So, hear this too. Okay, so we fly, it's 35 hours without sleep that first day. We arrive in London, we take a train to Manchester, which is 4 hours north of London, and then we get settled in our hotel, and then we walk to the church about 30 minutes after we arrive in our hotel for a team meeting, prayer, and something. And so we are and we're meeting all these people we've never met before. We know no one. And we also are both currently not in youth ministry. So there's that. And we're here to help at a youth conference. And if you know anything about England, which we did not know this specific thing at the point, that the accent in the northern parts is quite thick versus London. So our experience in the past had been London English accents and British accents, but in Manchester and some of the cities of the students that were coming from the surrounding areas were very thick, to the point where most of the time we didn't understand what they were saying, honestly. So here we are, not expecting any culture shock at all. Why would we? They speak English. So you don't think you're going to experience culture shock when you're in an English-speaking country. However, it's a very different English-speaking country than America. So there was most definitely culture shock, especially being 4 hours north of London. So we're not understanding things, and even little things like this. They would walk up to us, and quite often, multiple times a day, they'd be like, "You all right? You okay? You okay?" And it seemed like we didn't look okay. Oh my gosh, are they worried about us? But that was their way of saying, "Hey, what's up?" Well, we didn't know that. So we were we must look terrible all the time. Yeah, we're fine. And we're overcompensating, Anyway, that's just an example. It took us maybe 3 days to figure that out, I think. So, anyway, it was an incredible time of just God moving, Every night, dozens of students raised their hand for salvation. I mean, there was over 800 students, and they were coming to know Jesus. There was healings. There were passionate worship experience. I'm talking hype at its, but not in a bad sense of hype. Just they were really excited for Jesus, just really excited for Jesus. We were just wow. In the room, they didn't have air conditioning, so it was 97 degrees. And these students didn't stop jumping and dancing. I'm like, this is gross. Honestly, you guys are gross. But anyway, at one point during this gross, extremely passionate worship situation, Faith gets randomly approached. So, Lauren, you tell that story.
Yeah, so we had just finished doing communion with our groups, and then I get up and we go back to worship, and this girl walks up to me and she's like, "Hey, can you pray for my friend Shannon? She's right over there. We're trying to get as much people with as much faith as possible." And I was like, "Sure." And I kind of seen sorry, my nose is a little stuffed. I kind of seen some commotion during worship in the area where her friend was before, and I thought maybe she got hurt, because when you're jumping around and it's a bunch of teenagers, that happens pretty often. Someone will get stepped on. It happens. But I go over there, and her youth pastor's like, "Oh, can I help you?" I was like, I was just pulled in to pray for her, and I had no idea what was wrong. And she was like, "Oh yeah, gather around." She dislocated her hip, and I was like, "Okay." And so she's sitting down. She has an ice pack on her hip, and I just like put my hand on her leg because there's like a lot of people like around her, and lots of them were probably like her youth group and stuff. So we were praying for like a while, and then our youth pastor was like, okay, like how about let's give her some space. Like it's like really hot in here, and we'll just stay around here and like worship around her. So we did that, and then the youth pastors ended up getting called up for something, so she was gone. And one of this girl's friends was like, hey, why don't you like try it out? She was like, I literally can't lift my leg. Like it doesn't lift. Like it's like she was sending a message with her brain, but she like it doesn't work. And he was like, okay, well, why don't we like help you up? Maybe you could try to walk. She's like, are you serious? Like I can't move. Like you really want me to try it out? And he was like, yeah. So a couple of guys help her up, and then they're just kind of like holding onto her shoulders, and then she like takes a step, and then she just is kind of shocked, and they like let go, and then she walks forward and back like completely fine, like totally fine. Before she couldn't even like lift her leg.
So that was just crazy. That was literally maybe 10 feet in front of me. I saw nothing. Like I literally, because there's so many people, it's just crazy. But yeah, that was just incredible. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, that was really cool, and it was like, even, I forgot this part, but when she was sitting down and a bunch of people were surrounding her, I'm sure people she knew and then people she didn't know me, I didn't know her, and I was like, I just kind of had a feeling like we all, like I can tell everyone here really wants this healing to happen, we really have the faith for it, but I was like, even if it doesn't, I feel like there's more in this for her, like just seeing just the people around her. She had her eyes closed, so she didn't know how many people were around her, but I was like, I just kind of feel like that would mean a lot to her. And as soon as I thought that in my head, one of her friends like leans over to her and like whispers and is like, open your eyes. And she looks up and like she sees everyone around her and she immediately starts crying. So that was like really powerful for her. And then when she did get healed, a bunch of people in her youth group just start crying, and they're like, I don't know, almost like they really had faith for it to happen, but they didn't know that it was actually going to happen. And then I got a chance to speak with her for a little bit after. The service was still going on, but she left for a second, and I just kind of walked out, and I felt like I had like a couple things I wanted to say to her, and I wanted to pray with her about. I had asked her if she struggles with anxiety and depression and OCD, and she was like, yeah. I was like, all of the above. She's like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. Do you want to like pray? And so I prayed for her, and I felt like I had some words for her, and she starts crying again. And I was just sharing, like, I just feel like this healing is more for you than just physical. Like, I feel like this is just, it's emotional as well. And she was like, yeah, that really makes sense. And yeah, I saw her like here and there after and smile at each other. And yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, just crazy, so cool. There was like lots of different breakthrough moments, and God doing things in students and in us during that time. So anyway, we do the 5 days there, and then it's time to head back towards London. So the day we find out, and I think Craig had shared this with you, that morning, one of the main pastors at this church gets up to make an announcement right before the conference is ending and says, hey, there's riots here in this city. They've come down from another city, and there's like lots of protests, and it's just kind of getting kind of brutal. There's like cars being lit on fire, and it's just really wild, and they're starting to shut stations down, bus stations, train stations, things like that. So we were like, oh no, we're gonna be stuck here forever. We don't understand the people, just kidding. But we did have a train ticket, and it was non-transferable, so we had to get on that train. So anyway, really cool. I mean, we were just we weren't afraid. We just were like, well, we'll just let them know that whenever they're ready they were gonna give us a ride to the train station, that we're just ready. We can just go and wait there or whatever. And we got in the car, we drove. Literally, I mean, there's riots in the city, apparently everywhere. We didn't see anything. we were not in danger. Even the train station that we were leaving from had a displacement order that if you got caught outside the train station, that you would have been picked up by the police and taken out of the city for 24 hours, not allowed to return. But we literally saw nothing. Like, so it was like we were just like hidden and protected. And so we just kind of went in. Faith got some food. We were waiting for the train. We were just like chilling. And so it was just really cool to know that we had such peace and such protection in the middle of such danger. So it was really cool. When we got back and last Sunday, and I was talking with Tony about this, and because something I know that he'd been praying for us while we were gone about protection specifically. And he said this. I don't know if you remember Tony saying this, but he said, "When you are sent, you are safe." And man, that really like stuck with me. I was like, that's a word right there. That was good. So we get to London. Now what? Okay. So London was just different because at least in Manchester, although it was like hard dealing with like strangers and all this stuff, like at least we had jobs. Like we knew what we were doing, right? Well, in London, we like have to like make it up, sort of, you know. Not really, we're not gonna make it up because that would be striving and making things happen, but you know that pressure that you feel like, oh, God sent me here, now I need to do something, you know, and you're just like I don't wanna waste our time, but like I don't want to make up stuff if God's not in it. So there was that pressure, but yet trying to stay at rest, trusting Him, that we're not gonna strive into something man-made. So meanwhile, I have these things that I had, these words that I had written on my phone that I felt that maybe it was the Lord, you know, and it was just like random things. And there was a few of them. And so basically what we ended up doing was what we would call like a treasure hunt. So I don't know, some of you might know what that is. Faith, why don't you explain kind of what a treasure hunt is?
Yeah, so at school, we called them activations. My activation was treasure hunts and prayer walks. And so a treasure hunt, we basically get to our activation and we'd have a piece of paper and we're supposed to, it has like different things on it, like names, location, like something out of the ordinary, just like it has this list of things that we can fill out if we feel God speaking to us. So we take like 10 minutes, pray about it, and if we hear names, we write that down. We feel like we should go to Walmart, we write that down, and it just like step by step, and then you basically, if you have a word for the person like already that you haven't met yet, then you write that down as well. But if not, you just kind of walk up and you're like, is there anything I can pray for you for? And yeah,
so that's kind of like what it is. And so I have these words that I felt like God had given to me before we got there. So Proverbs 25 verse 2 says it is God's privilege or glory to conceal things and the king's privilege or glory to discover them. So it was kind of like there's like these hidden things that God had put around the city, and it was our privilege and glory to kind of find them and then kind of like find the treasure that He had put in people's lives and draw that out and you know, through that an encounter with Him. That was the goal. So I have these clues for the treasure, and I think I had, 7 or 8 of them, and I'm not going to share all of them, but I'll share a couple. So a couple that I had on my list was John, the name John, and Mary and Joseph, which honestly I didn't even want to share with Faith because I'm like, this is so weird, like Mary, really? So I wasn't saying anything, but then I was like, well, I need to tell her. So I was like, well, we're looking for a John and a Mary and Joseph. And so we had talked to so many people, and literally every time we would talk to someone, would be like, and what is your name? Every time. It was like so funny. But no, John, Mary, and Joseph. I had the store in my mind that I couldn't get out of my mind, and I'm like, oh, so we kept going in this one specific store, it's M&S, Marks and Spencer, and I'm like, I don't even know why we're in here. We don't even want anything in this store, but we kept going back. I had a picture of butterflies, and there's also Jim. When you prayed for us in the way, you had this vision of daisies. He had this vision of daisies that he shared with us. So there was like a lot of different things on this list. But anyway, we're not finding these people. And then Faith says, just randomly, she's like, I think it's locations, not people. I think it's clues to locations. I don't think it's people. And I was like, Well, that day, we were on our way somewhere that Faith had felt before we even went to England. She said, I want to go to the place where John Wesley had an encounter kind of with God. Like, it was like a profound situation. So that day, we're like walking. It's terrible. It's a rainy day. And it was, actually, we had excellent weather. They kept saying, oh, California, you brought the good weather. And we're like, great, because I guess it's been very cloudy there. And so, but this day was really bad, and Faith actually was not feeling well. She had got a cold, and she was just like, her sinuses were blocked. She was a trooper, though. I mean, I was like really impressed. She was just, like, nothing was holding her back. She was like, I'm going anyway, But we had planned to go to the John Wesley house, church, things like that. And then she's like, I think it's locations. You had the name John. And in my head, and what I had written, it was the way that John Wesley spells his name. And I'm like, I think you're right. So anyway, we go there, and immediately we have an instant opportunity to pray with this young man and his dad. And his dad actually didn't speak English. Where did they say they were from? Was it Ghana?
Yes.
Ghana. And so we're taking a picture of them because I guess it was like a really big deal to them. And then we were like, well, can we pray for you guys? And the son was like, yeah, no, we would definitely take prayer. So his dad won't look at us, though. He won't make eye contact. He's just kind of like, can't speak English, and it's just feeling uncomfortable, but we're just like, well, we're just going to go for it. So we start praying, and I prayed. I think you prayed, and for what was on her heart and things like that. And instantly, when the prayer ended, the dad looked up. He was smiling. He was engaging. He was saying thank you. It was like night and day. And I mean, I don't think he understood anything, but something on the inside changed. And so that was my clue. John Wesley, those were the people, but his name was not John. So that was like really, really cool. So like I said, that day it was raining a lot. We were on a mission to walk to a children's hospital. Before we had left, I felt the Lord say to find a children's hospital and to go to it. It was pouring rain. I mean, it was just terrible, and she's not feeling well. And so anyway, she says to me, though, she had said to me before, the clue about Mary and Joseph. She said, do you think, so there's a coffee shop in England called Pret a Manger. And she said, do you think it's that? And I'm like, maybe Mary and Joseph, manger, like kind of like could be. So anyway, I don't know. Anyway, it's raining this day. We had gone in a couple. We had no experiences where we go in this one. We're like, Faith has taken some medicine, and so she's kind of like a little out of it. She hadn't eaten that much, and the medicine is maybe a little strong. So she's kind of like a little cloudy, and I'm like, I think we need to get you some food. So we go in this place, it's pouring rain, and we sit down, and I'm going to get her some tomato soup so she can eat. And then she noticed something. So why don't you tell the story?
Yeah, so a couple tables over from us, there was this like older lady, and she was trying to open this like thermos that she brought. It's like a big thermos, probably had like coffee in it or something. I can't really remember. And she was like kind of struggling to open it for a while, but I honestly couldn't think I could open it, because I was like, maybe I should go over there. But I was like, I don't think I could. So when you go back to the table, it's like, hey, do you want to go open her thermos?
Yeah, she's like, she's having trouble. Maybe you should help her. And I'm like, I could probably do it. So I'm like, if I can't, it would be awkward, but at least we tried. So I kind of like look over, and I'm like, we like link eyes or whatever, and I'm like, do you want some help? And she's like, oh, she was like a little embarrassed, but also like, yeah, I like really need help, So we walk over, and sure enough, I was able to open it, which was awesome. So I don't know. And she's like, thank you so much. Thank you for noticing. I was like, oh, it was actually my daughter that noticed. Anyway, within 30 seconds, we were both sitting at the table with her. We had like moved our stuff over, and we were sitting down, and we come to find out that she is there today. She lost her daughter 4 years before. Her daughter had passed away. We don't know the story of what happened. It seemed like maybe not the question to ask. It seemed maybe tragic or something, so we didn't go there. But she was there grieving her daughter. Her son-in-law that day was becoming, in Wales, he was becoming something like really important. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she likened it to like a prime minister of a country. But he was getting some kind of, recognition and job. And so it was like really hard. Like she has grandchildren and her daughter's missing this, and it was just kind of this hard time. So she was there just to be alone and to grieve. So we said, can we pray for you? And she said, I don't really practice or believe necessarily in God, like as in follow him, but I do pray. I like to pray a lot. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm like, okay, well, that's our in. So she shared a lot. She was actually a journalist, we found out. And I had one of my books, on basically the impossible, and I gave it to her. I felt the Lord say to give it to her, and she thanked me. First, she's like, I'll go on and buy it. I'm like, no, I have it here, and I don't want to take it home. And we were able to pray with her, and Faith had some like words like from the Bible, like how God is close to the brokenhearted, and she just began to kind of like release that, and it was like really impacting to this lady. Like you could see the impact. And then she said this. She said, she was really missing her daughter that day, and she said the fact that it was you, she was pointing at me at that moment, with your daughter who came today to pray with me, she's like, it just made all the difference. And, so somewhere where the enemy had tried to rip her off, God redeemed in that moment with a mom and daughter. So it was like really, really cool. She hugged us, so cool. So, that's just a few of the stories. Back to what I was talking about, in order to do everything in our generation that God has sent us to do, we're going to go into places and spaces that are uncomfortable, and we can't do it alone, Without faith, I wouldn't have figured out any of these clues. I would still be looking for John, Mary, and Joseph, Without me, Faith wouldn't have any of the clues, because God gave them to me. Without Faith, I wouldn't have been on that trip, because it was her trip that God spoke to her, and then there was other things, and we chased down a guy who was with a limp. We ran after him to pray. When we went to the Children's Hospital, we snuck in and we put anointing oil and prayed through all the halls. And there's just so many stories of what God was doing, and just us being so scared but doing it anyway. We prepare the way of the Lord with our yes to him, and putting ourselves in situations that we wouldn't normally do. But there's one more story, and I know we've gone late, but I want to share this because many of you had a role in this, and I know all of you were praying for us, and many of you, supported us financially as well, and we asked for nothing. This, sometimes when you go on a mission trip, you put out there and you ask to raise support. We asked no one for anything, but God put it on some of your hearts, and that's just like incredible. And right now we are like, the trip, it's expensive, and we're in the same family, so it's the same pot, kind of deal. But we are like so close to having it paid off, so close. So like just to the glory of God, But anyway, one more story. So Stephanie, she's not here this morning, but she texted me when we were away, and she had some impressions from the Lord as she was praying for the trip. And so she shared that. Jim, as I mentioned, he had the picture of the daisies and other things. So what I didn't mention is in between Manchester and London, we had, on the way first, when we arrived in London, Eliza, who was here last Sunday and led worship, Josiah's wife, her mom picked us up from the airport to bring us to the train station. Before we got to the train station, we went on this little walk. The first thing I noticed on the walk was daisies everywhere. I'm like, daisies, and it triggered my mind. I'm like, okay, daisies, okay. So I asked Vicky, Eliza's mom, I said, is there anything special about daisies in the UK? She said, well, kind of, yes. She said, they are everywhere and they grow wild. They won't be there and then they're everywhere, which was your vision of the barren field, and then poof, they're there. So I shared Jim's word with Vicky about the bare field and then how daisies bloom suddenly. And she said that she had been given that exact same prophetic word. Exact. Okay, so keep that in your mind. So now we're on the way back. We arrive at the train station, and Vicky picks us up again, and we're gonna have 2 days with her and her husband, so Eliza's parents, before we go to London. Just kind of like a little kind of in-between refresher, kind of like, let's regroup, what just happened to our lives and what are we about to face kind of deal. So we're in between this. So Vicky is a vicar in the Church of England, okay? So that's like a pastor in the Church of England, okay? So before we left, I was in the prayer room one day, and God gave me an elaborate prophetic word about the Church of England and the UK and just specific things. And I had written it all out. So Vicky also told me that when I shared about the daisies, she said that to her, when she got that word, she felt that the Lord said it represent a change in atmosphere. Okay, so she said the daisies would change atmosphere and shows the beauty and the glory of the Lord where there was nothing. So I was like, oh, that's really good. So now stay with me. Stephanie had texted me these impressions that she was getting from the Lord. One of the things that she gave was a name, Elisa. Okay, so I'm looking for this because I'm looking for people, right? Because all the names, because that's what I think they are. I don't recognize their clues, so I'm looking for people. So we don't find her anywhere. I ask everyone, what's your name again? What's your name? Like no one. So when Craig is talking about Josiah and Eliza coming, he says something, and Luce is there. And Luce says Eliza's name back. And I guess in Spanish, it's pronounced Elisa, right? Okay. So I'm telling Craig, I'm like, yeah, the only thing is we didn't find Elisa. And he's like, well, Luce said blah, 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 and Eliza and Eliza's parents and Vicky. And so my mind is now blowing with the daisies and all this, like it's all just kind of coming together. So keep that in your mind. So I have this word about the Church of England. Give it to me in the prayer room. I'm sitting with Vicky, the vicar, in the Church of England, who had been given the exact same daisy word that Jim gave us. And suddenly the Lord says to me, give her the UK word. Give it to her. It's for her. So Eliza's mom, Vicky, give her the word. Stephanie's also word was, there's going to be times you're going to be in conversation with people and God's going to be speaking to you. And you're going to feel distracted, but you have to follow what he's saying. This is what's happening. Vicky is talking to me, and I'm just like, give her the word, daisies. Yeah, I mean, it's just like all happening at once. So then I begin to share and unpack the word. And it's about a prominent idol in the Church of England and the Lord's desire to have the church leaders that are in place to destroy them and bring them down. It was an extensive word. She then begins to share how she's there in this leadership in the Church of England in a context that's not in her nature. But God is calling her to bring about a shift and change of atmosphere to take down the religious formality that's been shaping the church but not changing the people. So she said that this word brought light to something that she's never made the connection on but been battling in the spirit. So it brought revelation to what she'd already been sensing and experienced but just didn't have the verbiage for it. So this word, given in the prayer room, clues from Stephanie and Jim. The call of God for faith to go to the UK. Then the courage to ask me to come. The support from all of you, Craig, Luz. In order to do everything, we need each other. If we're going to do everything in our call, in our generation, in our time, we need each other. All of us. I think that's all I'm going to say. I think I'm going to end there. Why don't we stand and let me pray you guys out of here. Father, I just thank you for just the privilege of preparing the way of the Lord. I thank you for every person in this room and their place as we join together and follow your call. I pray that even in this moment, that they would be encouraged by their faithfulness and their yes to you. I pray that you would continue to speak, bring revelation, and call. And I pray that you would give the courage for each one to give, to go, and to trust. In your name, amen. God bless you. Let's go.